Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. The topic for discussion is on racism. Crucial conversations around systemic racism in America, particularly against the Black people. It has been ongoing nationwide since last month after the death of George Floyd. And we might end up even talking about colorism, faithism, genderism, but let's see how the conversation goes. We have very interesting panelists and intelligent and expertise today with us joining. I'd like to do a quick introduction, and our panel will last till probably 6 p.m. And you've already asked us questions, and we've incorporated those questions into our discussion today. So we do have Ariel Harris here. Ariel is the CEO of Family Farm and Development. I've known her for many years now. Very interesting person in giving back to the community. Her heart is in the farms, and but I've been with her to the rural areas of even Georgia as well. So thank you, Ariel, for joining us today. And next we have Rob. Rob is the executive director for Atlanta Beltline Partnerships. And Rob, I haven't been to the Beltline for some time now, but I know we took a tour probably 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm sure you're doing a wonderful job, and of course, being inclusive of diversity and in any activities that you do there. But sure, it's a very needed thing. Physical activity keeps us all healthy. So Rob, thank you for everything that you do. Next, we have Aaron. Aaron is probably you're younger than I'm younger than you, Aaron. So you seem to be the second youngest in this group today. And Aaron is the policy student majoring in economic development at Georgia State University. So we are so excited to have you, Aaron, and to understand the youth's perspective on all what that is going on. I'm sure you have your peers and you talk to your peers much different than our generation here. Next, we have Parag Mehta. Parag, thank you for joining us. And I hope Vaibhav is excited to be listening to you today. And Parag leads the philanthropy at MasterCard as the executive director. And for that, for 20 years, he's been in political activism and public service, and has done a lot of Asian American or LGBTQ Americans. He spent 4 years protecting workers' rights, staff for our previous US Surgeon General. So thank you, Parag, for being here. Oren, a very special person indeed. You teach how to be someone, which is very nice. And sometimes we forget that we are someone. And I'm sure angels like you come forward to give a direction. It's the checkmate, right? So thank you, Oren. I don't know chess, but you know, it's sort of giving me some interest, and you never know, I might end up being your student as well. So thank you for joining us. And Daniela is a dear friend of mine for some time. We worked and she was a collaborative community partner and executive in Families Achieving Success Together. So great job, Daniela. I'm listening to you today. Kalissa, thank you so much. The special person out here from all the way from Oregon. So thank you. And Kalissa does something special as well. Kalissa is, she teaches how to unlearn racism. It's easy to learn something, it's easy to pick up something, but how do you unlearn the childhood lessons that has been taught either in school or families? So we would love to hear from you more, Kalissa. NAACP's president in Atlanta. We are also working together on a review board at the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. So I think there itself, we are showing our common ground on how to give hope to the innocents who've been incarcerated. And Richard, you are also a public accountant by another profession, that the other hat you wear. But I'm sure all of you have so many good stories to tell. Parag, if I may, I somehow figured you're in around Atlanta, which I know you're not. I think you're in DC.
New York.
New York, see? Okay, good. So we have one person from Oregon and New York. And all of us all are in and around Atlanta. So thank you so much for joining us. The chat sessions and the just full meaningful talks along one first chai ever. So congratulations, Rob. Now you picked up something new. So we hope you
Thank
make
you.
more of chais and join our chats in the future as well. And this session is also brought to you by Bytecraft Productions. So thank you, Praveen and Prashant, for helping us, and is also sponsored by Vendorship Inc. So thank you. So the first question that I want about our topic today. So Ariel, if the genie had, would you ask for, and let us know within 30 seconds?
Anything. I would like us all to learn to listen to each other and hear each other's perspectives.
Wow.
That would be the gift.
Very nice. And you didn't even need 10 seconds there, 5 seconds, some of the things that we've been taught. So thank you, Ariel. Rob, next question is your question. What was your first win that made you confident that you're doing the right thing, whatever you're doing now? Can you unmute, Rob?
Before I came to the Beltline, I didn't get to spend much time in a lot of the neighborhoods, particularly in Southwest Atlanta. And while there's no specific instance, just a lot of relationships that have been built over the years with residents, frankly, in neighborhoods that maybe I used to just drive over on the highway, but really building meaningful relationships with folks in Southwest Atlanta in particular.
So that's a good win that you continue to like, and I'm obviously because you're still there after many years doing what you're doing. So thank you, Rob. Aaron, the next question is for you. Who is someone you admire and respect?
Honestly, I mean, this is going to sound cliche, but I admire her willingness to help people has really stuck. So
very, very well indeed. And thanks for reminding that to all of us. So what is one thing you wish your parents had said to you growing up?
I wish my parents had said to me that the freedom that we enjoy in this country, the rights that we enjoy in this country, were born on the backs of African Americans for us to live here. I had to learn that in school. I wish I had learned that at home.
Wow, and Parag, I couldn't, and I agree, and I think that is the story of most of our generation, immigrants all the way from Asia. So yes, very much needed, and still need that education needs to continue, but we'll discuss that detail in our discussion. And so Kalissa, if you could improve one thing in the world by doing one thing, what would you choose to do? Or if you could improve the world by doing one thing, what would you choose to do?
Does it have to be one thing that I could actually do? Do I get the genie?
Yeah,
too?
You don't even need the genie, and here you go.
If I could do 1,000 things and dismantle racism throughout the world, I would do that.
When you would like to travel that you've not already, and why in the world?
Well, that's a tough one. Have several places on the list. I would say Africa. I haven't been to Africa, and I would like to go there to see what I can do to eradicate some things and kind of get young people to thinking and using a God-given brain. So, but you said I teach people to be someone. Basically, I teach people how to think strategically about their future and how to make.
Thank you, Oren. That's very wise. So, Richard, can you unmute yourself? Yes.
Sorry, that's easy. If I won $1 million, I would hire a bunch of masonry experts to cover the carvings on Stone Mountain.
Yeah, you know what? That's I've been to Stone Mountain many times, and I'm sure many of those who are listening too. But recently, I saw a documentary of the history while we were in the Stone Mountain. So yes, thank you, Richard, for probably making use of the $1 million wisely. That brings you happiness. So, Richard, I want to continue the next question with you. And the reason I'm coming to you is because you are sort of among all of us here, deep down in weeds and roots of what needs to happen or what is happening now. Do you have a story about someone in your family standing up against injustice?
I got a zillion of them, but let me tell you about one. My grandmother ran a tailor shop in Itta Bena, Mississippi. And so at the time, the protocol was that Black people went to the back door if they went to a white household. She would instruct my cousins who delivered her clothing, and they had a speech that said, "These clothes are for you." I cannot imagine the courage that it took.
I'm not mistaken, and sometimes even I'm learning. Though I'm moderating, you would think I need to know more. But and maybe any of you can answer this. So when we said there was a different entrance and different space for colored people, did that include people like us as well?
But it depends. Sometimes the language difference or the accent difference kind of insulated from from the harsh treatment that African descendants had. Even Chinese, for example, Chinese restaurants and so forth were treated with a lot more respect than native African Americans. So there was a difference, and it really depends on the locality and depends on the person.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. So, Aaron, the next question is for you. And please be, brutally honest. And I think that's why we are calling this a crucial conversation. Otherwise, it'll just end up in like another panel discussion, without action step and without understanding the deep thoughts from how you feel. So, what's your earliest memory of becoming aware that?
I feel like 7 or 8 years old, actually, because I knew people look different, in their skin. Because I grew up in a predominantly Black area, so I didn't really, and how he was just, and that was the first time I really got into history and so honor that he deserved, which was the Medal of Honor, because that stuck out to me, that somebody was treated differently because of the color of their skin, and that we live in a society that's racist, and I became steadily more conscious from that point on. So
Wow, okay. So Rob, continuing to that question, what's your earliest memory of becoming aware of your own white identity?
It really goes back to, it would be in high school, because if I'm honest, I was in predominantly white elementary schools and junior high, and it's when I went to public school. I grew up in Miami. So my white identity was less about white and Black in Miami as it was about white in a lot of countries of Hispanic origin. But even playing on the soccer team, and the white guys I had to learn Spanish, right, to be able to communicate, and that was it's fine, and that was different. As far as from a real kind of white and Black standpoint, it was definitely in moving to Atlanta, and once I started work. While I was aware of Blackness, it was really learning about the differences in upbringing, right? And the conversations that Black people need to have with their kids that I haven't had to have with my son. And that was really more as an adult, I think, when I became more aware of the implications of my whiteness relative to others.
Okay, thank you so much, Rob. And we'll continue to discuss this further, that you talked about the implications and if any changes have been, happening. So, Oren, the next question is for you. How does racism occur in today's world? And I'm sure in the industries it differs, but have you witnessed acts of racism? Or why does racism persist?
Was that a question for me?
Yes, Oren.
Yeah. Racism is alive and well, but I just lean on God, and I obey God and leave all the consequences to Him. I tell people all the time that you will experience challenges, but you just got to put your trust in God, obey God, and leave all the consequences to Him. Pharaoh's army was well dressed. Pharaoh's army had plenty of bread, had excellent reputation, had all this good stuff, but Pharaoh's army was not able to overcome the good people. So I just tell people that you will endure that, but just work on yourself, be the best you can, and the silver lining that you will win in the end, because God, being a God of just, will not let racism win over good. So I ran across it in my life. I've been in court. God will prevail over bad people.
into activism and say, I'm going to change that. So do you try to calm them down to say that, it's going to exist?
Yeah, I tell people you got to stay cool, stay calm, collected. Don't do the first thing before you act. Don't fight the police. Don't pull a gun on the police. Don't do that. It's just don't do that. So we got to teach people to have a calm mind. People will come to you and say, wait a minute, let's kill Moses. The Red Sea got us blocked Pharaoh. No, we're not doing none of that. And so we teach people to stay calm, stay cool, choose peace instead of violence, brains before bullets, think it out, don't shoot it out. The only way to fight is to use your head. You got to stay cool, you got to stay calm, and you got to stay together. You got to stay collected because out of frustration, you'll make a bad move. So we want to just, be quick to hear, be quick to see, and be slow to anger. You just can't do it. You got to think it through, and people will treat you wrong, but there will be a silver lining. That's justice really out there. It's really justice out there. And you just got to be aware that, that you will win if you just stay cool and stay calm and don't try your case in the middle of the highway. Just settle down and we'll deal with it later.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Oren. Danella, talk about a minute when someone else said or did something racist and you interrupted it.
Before I answer that question, can I, what you witnessed, to even use, we're traumatized. And often that says fight or flight, go inward or go outward, that's the response to it. And it's so interesting because as an African-American woman in this country, I'm 53 years old and I've been working 7th generation military troops, so I'm 7th generation, represent my country, and I'm traumatized. I don't think it's about staying cool. I want to stay cool, but I'm going into Walmart or Target and I'm just trying on a shirt. And the person just asked me to open up my purse because she thinks I stole her phone. Now, if you looked at me, you could tell I'm affluent. Well, I could tell I'm affluent. I can tell I'm well educated, but not necessarily if you're just looking at my skin color. So these microaggressions and macroaggressions and aggressions put us in a situation where even if we get stopped by the police, I'm experiencing heart palpitations because I don't know if I'm gonna, get home. I mean, that's a real threat. The world is not safe to African Americans or Black people in general. So I don't want us to walk over that comment and, we just act like we're not cool. Most images you see about African Americans, they don't look like me. You see people that are not well-spoken, they're not in control. That's not who we are. And even, people that come from underserved communities, they're people, they're human beings. Most of our culture come out of those neighborhoods. So I don't want to walk over it and say, we just got to be cool. And Oren, I think you do an amazing job with youth, but I just want to shift it back into this conversation of what I witnessed. I'm in seminars all the time because I'm up to self-development as a human being. And I had a seminar this weekend, and for the first time, still witnessed that video for the 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I responded to it. I cried like a baby because we can't use this moment and walk over the fact that we're not treated as human beings. That's the first step. That's the first response to why these things are going on. My children are not considered human. And had that officer did that to an animal, you have laws in place that he would have immediately been dealing with a federal crime. So I think if we kind of hang that out in the periphery and use that as a basis to have some meaningful dialogue on this, this panel, I think we can get to some real solutions.
Definitely. And I was on a panel last evening, Danella, and I had to just say it, and I said it, and I said, if there's someone who's trying to justify George Floyd's death, then there's something really going on with their brain cells. And I just don't know how to clean their brain cells unless they decide themselves to clean their brain cells, which can be done in several ways, in educating themselves and getting counseling. So yes, I agree with you in every word that you said just now. There's just no way for a person.
But he's
Maybe
not the only one. See, because my community, we know that it just so happened to be recorded. And I think we need to talk about this. It happens all of the time. It's just not captured on film. And this is the other thing we don't need to walk over. Everybody is now, you can see what they're capturing from their point of view. You got it? So for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we saw what the person who was recording, the young lady who was recording that incident and the trauma she's going to experience by staying with the incident, because she knew something was going to be significant around this incident and what she needed to do to make sure it was captured.
Definitely.
So that happens all the time. Again, I don't want us to think this is a one-off, or it sounds like it's a one-off. Just need to make sure we capture what's happening, at least in my community, and then we're able to really talk about it for some real solutions.
Definitely. And as we move forward, we'll also discuss about how do we, or people, heal from the pain or the trauma. So we'll discuss that as we move forward. The next question is for you, Carissa, is what's something that you've done to make things right after you learned that your actions had racist outcomes? Or talk about a time when someone else did or said something racist and you didn't speak up, and why? And maybe it's not there, but I'm hoping I'm trying to ask you the right question.
Well, I probably have many examples of both of those, but so I teach white people. So my specific work that I do is I help white people get better at talking about race and taking action against racism. So I teach largely out of my own mistakes and experiences. So I have sort of forgotten your questions now, but I remember the gist. So I can think of a particular situation. I used to work at our local government. And I was having a conversation with a woman of color and had said something wrong. I could tell by her body reaction, by her facial expression, that I had said something wrong. And so in my white fragility in the moment, I did what I tend to do in a white fragility moment, is I just started talking faster and faster to sort of try to talk around the mistake and correct it sort of in this whole talky kind of way. And in the end, I went away from that experience. Again, one of many. I think that unlearning racism is something that white people have to do for the rest of our lives. I took that feeling of unease and embarrassment and did some activities. I do meditation and I do journaling, and came up with some ways that I could more cleanly address my mistake with this woman. So the next day I went to work. I asked her if I could talk to her for a second, just not making a huge big deal of it or asking her to teach me anything, just said, the other day when we were talking, I could tell that when I said this, it seemed like you really reacted, and I apologize. And I had learned the appropriate language to use in the meantime. So that's one example. And I can't, so you had one of my racial mistake, and what was the other one? other
So
question.
let me ask you as a follow-up to that answer, I think, and thank you so much for being very open about, and as you started talking, at least I saw 3 heads nodding in this panel as if they understood you, and that's what happens, right? So do you have white friends who are working against you, or from your own family, from people you know who are not associating with you anymore?
I have had
Question.
I've had people over the years, my wife being one of them. She doesn't say this anymore, but used to say, you think everything is about race. And actually, I do think that there is something about race in everything. And that one of the issues that we have as white people is that we live in this bubble of non-racialized reality that makes it impossible for us to see the real world. So for example, to be able to, the multiple examples of how unsafe it is to be Black in the United States and in many other countries, all the way from being, oh, I can't hear my son, sorry, all the way from being kind of crushed as a person. I don't like the term microaggressions really, because I don't think that they're small, particularly because if someone were to throw pebbles at you all day long, and it could be any person, and it could be a teacher, and then it's your friend, and then that's not minor. That influences who you are, and I also feel like that perpetrating those acts of throwing pebbles at people, even if we're unaware of them, harms white people. It makes us less, as James Baldwin would say, it makes us moral monsters.
Yes, thank you so much, and appreciate your open response over there, Kelessa. We need more of you, I guess, for those who don't understand that their actions or their conversations is creating a negative impact on the other side. So thank you for what you do. Ariel, my next question is for you. Many people do say I'm not a racist, right? However, we all grow up with our own implicit biases, and sometimes we are all humans, right? We err in different ways. But what would you say to someone who confidently says I'm not a racist, and how that may or may not affect their views, his or her views of others? And this was a question asked by one of the attendees.
I need to think about it for a minute, because I'm reading that white fragility that Kelessa was referring to. And one of the points that it makes very validly is that racism isn't an act. In this country, it is a system of unacknowledged laws, customs, traditions, business practices, and policies that advantage white people and block out access to those who are not African American and other people of color. And it has been that way since after the Civil War. If you dig into the history, you realize that Abraham Lincoln had a meeting with African American leaders and said right after the end of the war, he said, look, guys, how would you like to move to Central America? We don't want you in our country. That was Abraham Lincoln. Andrew Johnson, who was a white Southerner, immediately gave, and I know I'm going into history, but we need to acknowledge our history, and we need to acknowledge that white folks have created this system that is, to use the analogy in that book, like a little bird cage that people of color live in, and we move freely outside of. And they're only let out if we let them out. So I have relatives who tell me, no, I'm not racist. Of course I'm not racist. And maybe they aren't, in the sense they have Black friends, You know, they move freely, but we still support the system, and we still don't vote in the people that we need to vote into to make the necessary systemic changes. Black farmers, the people that my husband and I have worked with, you know, forever and ever, won a court case, Pigford v. Glickman, in 1999, and they were given, supposedly, fast-track access to international markets. They were supposed to be, the US Department of Agriculture was found to have been systemically discriminating against them for as long as the department has existed, and given them their loans too little too late for the crops to be successful. It's deliberate. It's deliberate, you know. So when the Black farmers won the Pigford case, guess who was put in charge of restitution? US Department of Agriculture. White folks did that. The judge in that case did that. The racism is systemic. And until we make a change of laws and policies and business practices, we can make all kinds of personal advances and move past our individual racism, right? Was in an interracial marriage, and my husband passed away way too soon. But every day that we lived together, if I had a white plumber come in my house, I worried about whether they would come back at night and want to do something to harm us. I mean, you know, as Calissa said, white folks we spend all of our lives unlearning our privilege. I mean, we created it for ourselves. You know, we're selfish human beings, but we're not the only human beings, and we've got to dismantle the structure that supports the idea that we can live blissfully in our part of the culture and think that, you know, everything else is fine. If Black folks work hard enough, they can, you know, they can rise up, certainly. You know, Daniela did it. My stepdaughter, Krista, is an attorney. She went to the Naval Academy. Yeah, there's all kinds of success that comes as a result of individual effort. But be that as it may, until we dismantle the structures that keep education from being unequal, you know, deny access to people that deserve it every bit as much as we do, you know, then we're going to encounter this problem again. Crumb, and I'll finish in a minute, but I was at Ole Miss in the 60s when James Meredith, you know, integrated the school, and we were occupied by the 101st Airborne for a semester. We had to check in and out of campus because there, you know, President Kennedy lied on the one hand, saying how peacefully the school was being integrated. Governor Faubus lied at the football game and stirred people up and said, you know, what horrible thing was happening on campus. And, you know, there were riots, there were killings, was tear gas. It was ridiculous. And so we thought we had gotten through this in the 60s and 70s. And here we are in 2020, and we're revisiting it again. And we're revisiting it because we have not dismantled the structure that supports the racist behavior.
Definitely, Ariel, and I have had a very good experience working with your husband, George Harris, and he was the only one in the US who called me Naz, and loved him really. And I still think of him and his passion in helping the Black farmers and, you know, educating us, and how he would say, Naz, this is how we have to say it or do it. And such a great mentor. So we miss him dearly. But my kudos to you for, you know, Mary and George many, many, many years ago, probably in the 50s. And I'm sure you've gone through so much of fear to even be in your own community just because he was an African American. So thank you, Ariel. We'd like to hear more from you as we move along. So Parag, the next question is for you. We saved the best question for you, Parag. So when the conversation is public, right, and it brings people together and we gain perspective from the other, we are learning experiences, differences. But is it ultimately about promoting mutual understanding and respect between diverse races? You are a champion advocating for equity. How does one advocate for respect and understanding?
Yeah, I think that we have to first acknowledge our truth, and we have to, as Ariel said, acknowledge the biases that we all have. But at the same time, I think we have to give people the ability to evolve and to, as we say, get on the right side of history. When I worked for President Obama during the 2008 campaign, there was a lot of talk about being on the right side of history. We would talk about it in terms of the election. We would talk about it in terms of advancing civil rights. And the question I would often ask is, what are the consequences for being on the wrong side of history, right? If we can whitewash our history and paint President Lincoln as an emancipator of the slaves and not address the racism that he had, if we can erase Woodrow Wilson's racist history and name institutions after him, if we can erect statues to Confederate generals and not acknowledge that they caused significant harm and were traitors to this country, then we don't actually have consequences for being on the wrong side of history. Ariel mentioned, President Lincoln. The guy behind me, Mahatma Gandhi, the father of India, was a racist. It's not in dispute. He said awful things about African people when he was living in South Africa, but he evolved. Over time, he changed his beliefs because he engaged with leaders of the African American civil rights movement. Dr. King, on the other side of me, became a follower of Gandhi because he recognized that the example that Gandhi had set of using nonviolent resistance could be a viable way to advance civil rights for Black people in this country. And so we want to give people permission to be good again. I remember a few years ago when I was at the Labor Department, there was a 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. And we went to an event at the Justice Department with Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General. And Eric Holder held a panel with some of the freedom riders, the people Black and white who went down to Mississippi to register voters in 1964, this Freedom Summer. And he asked one of the white women, who at the time was probably 18 or 19 years old, he said, what was your strategy when you talked to white people? Right, because you were registering and educating Black folks, but what did you say to the racist white people? And she said, I would give them the opportunity to change their minds. Because I understood that at the end of the day, we can't just wait for a generation to die. We can't just educate our way out of the problem. We have to give people room to become good again. And I actually have taken that as a lesson because sometimes I get really angry about this, right? When I'm fighting with people who are saying racist things or saying the wrong things, especially on social media, you want to argue with them. You want to hit them with facts and figures. But we also have to remember that nobody wants to be the villain in their own story. And so giving people the ability and the example that it is possible to change, it is possible to evolve, it is possible to become good again, and giving them the permission to do so, I think is really important.
Yes, very well said. So you're sort of giving the message of hope and definitely so, Parag, I've been watching a lot of just the COVID-19 and all of us working from home, some of the historical Black movies about the struggles. As far as I know, I don't know if you and I have gone through the struggles that African Americans are going through, because back home, we lived in the post-freedom era, right? I'm sure our grandparents and grandparents went through the British rule in India. So how do you feel, so they say, be in my shoe and you will understand, but how is that, some people understand without even being in the shoes. So I'm talking about the Asian American community understanding what the Black community is going through.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's not comparable, right? I think we have to be really clear about this, particularly in this moment in time. Yes, we are the survivors of imperialism and of colonialism, and what the British Raj did in India, what is still happening in this country to Asian Americans is something we have to deal with, we have to address, we have to solve. But our job in this moment is to say very clearly that Black Lives Matter, that we stand in allyship with the Black community. That's why I began by recognizing that our not only our freedom in this country, but our freedom back home was in large part supported by African Americans. So we would not enjoy the rights we do if it weren't for them. And I think standing and saying that, and then doing the hard work in our own communities of educating around anti-Black racism in the Asian American community, anti-Black sentiment, colorism. When I was growing up, my first experience with racism wasn't with Black people. It was being a dark-skinned child in a light-skinned family and being told that because of that, my prospects in life were worse, that my marriage prospects were worse, my success would be worse because you're dark-skinned. And when you embed that in a 3-year-old child and a 5-year-old child, what are they supposed to take away? What worldview are they supposed to walk away with? So addressing anti-Black racism in our own communities has to be where we start.
Definitely. And thank you for affirming that. And I'm, as I always say and have said in the past, that if it wasn't for the African Americans or the Black community, people like us would be still sitting in the back bench and with no opportunities in the front, and would be trying to fight to put our talents out there. So I've always been grateful by learning. And I'm sure we all had our biases when we came to US, but it's the learning and educating ourselves. But now that we've educated ourselves, how do we educate others is probably the good way to go to create more allies for the Black Lives Matter. So thank you, Parag, for affirming that. So Aaron, my next question is for you. I want to talk about the younger generation, and I want Richard to tag along with you on this question. For Americans younger than 20 years old, the context of race or racism is very different, right? You do not have as many blatantly negative incidents or about issues of race as Richard might have had, right? The civil rights movement is our country's history, but it's not a recent history. You are not a part of it. All you hear about is the stories now. So what is remaining now is the prejudice, the racial and economic disparities. My question to you is, what do older people understand about race that younger people don't, and why youth are getting into this movement? And I want to put the same question to Richard as well. So what do older people understand about race that younger people don't? And go ahead.
One thing that older people understand about race that we don't is that it's not easy to fight racism. I think they have lived long enough to see that this is a problem that's going to take multiple generations. And I think one thing that people in my generation, have a hard time gripping with, and I'm just going to be honest, a lot of white people, they see what's going on now as, something that we can overcome and be done with by next year, and the reality is that this is a fight that's going to be fought, until way after I'm dead. It's just a reality. The racism is something that has to be, and this is personally, how we feel is that the older generation knows that because this was a problem that took 400 years to create, it's going to take a while to get rid of it. And that the things that we do now is crucial into helping our future generations. And so that's a perspective that I think the older generation has that, we personally don't,
Definitely. And Richard, what is the response to the same question, and what do you have to tell to Aaron for his response?
So I kind of disagree a little bit. I think the prospect of eradicating racism is probably not realistic. I've started this when I was 13. I'll be 72 next month. And what I recognize is that our work must be toward government endorsement of racism, government institutions, and that's what I focus on. And that's why, 5 years ago, I was kind of on the cutting edge to attack Stone Mountain, because what I recognize is that all the time we were out here working, voting, and all these things, these monuments have been teaching bigotry, teaching racism, because they stood in front of courthouses to say, this is normal. The objectives of oppression, and that's any kind of oppression, which includes racial oppression or sex oppression, the two objectives are deprivation and degradation. So deprive you of your resources, deprive you of your opportunity for resources, and then take away your pride, you know, to make you feel unworthy. And so the first reaction to oppression is always resistance. But then you get to do a first acknowledgement. And we know that to be a fact when we know history that, you know, stolen Africans tried to leave the ship. They took over some of the ships. They did everything acknowledging where they were, but still in the mode of resistance. The third reaction is acceptance. And that's most dangerous. And that's what we found out. Even when I was a kid, some people went to downtown theaters and went up the side door, the back door. You know, we didn't do that, but because we thought it was accepted racism. And of course, the fourth one is complicity, where members of the oppressed class assist with the oppressor. And that's not, you know, it's not for America. Jews did it in the Nazi regimes. And so, you know, and that's just the psychology of oppression is so involved and so deep, you know. And anger is one of the, anger and apathy are two of the biggest emotions that come out of sustained oppression. You know, we acknowledge that soldiers go and they go fight a couple of years in Afghanistan or Iraq, and they come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, the fact is that Black people in America live under stress all their lives, and it's not post, it is daily traumatic stress. And so you're gonna be angry. You know, James Baldwin said it in the 50s that if you're a Black man in America and you have any level of consciousness, you're pretty much angry all the time. And so when young men are stopped by police, they're gonna be angry. And so what we have to do is help young people understand, yeah, this first is wrong, but secondly, you got to save your own life, because the system is designed to take it away, to take away your freedom, take away your pursuit of happiness. And once America recognizes that it is in fact insidiously and erases, then it began to heal itself. It began to repair, you know, and reparation comes from the word repair, but it's not about a check. It's about repairing all of these systems that have limited Black prospects. And, you know, some would say, well, you know, look at Michael Jordan. Well, look at Michael Jordan. How many people can have the talent that Michael Jordan had on the basketball court? And for the most part, where the Black gains are either in athletics or the theater or some kind of art. Rank and file is tough. It's tough for me to have been a certified public accountant, even in a city like Atlanta, because racism still exists. And, you know, Black people can't necessarily be racist, but what they can be is white supremacists, where they bow down and accept the concept of white superiority. And so the young people, I see them getting it now. They've grown up in a different atmosphere. First time I was in a classroom with white people, I was in graduate school. So, you know, it's a different perspective. And I'm so happy that now they have, you know, I think they're getting away from what I call the 6-foot bubble, where, you know, people are only concerned about things that they can reach out and touch. And they can see how some things that happen to other people could be applied to them in similar circumstances. So I'm just real enthused. I'm inspired by the young people getting it, you know, understanding, taking to the streets. Because I think we can, if we work hard, you know, the next 30, 40 years, I won't be here, but I think we can repair these systems, but we have to understand we have to tear them down. We cannot fix policing in America. We have to just deconstruct it toward a policy of public safety. You know, right now you got 3 options if you call 911. If fire houses on fire, they send the fire department. If you got medical emergency, they send EMTs. everything else they send police. You know, so if a man in DeKalb County, they call him, he say he's walking down the street naked, he's talking out of his head, we can send psychiatrists or clinical psychologists, but not the police. You know, we have to expand what that 911 calls for. You know, people having a domestic situation, send social workers, you know, and may send police as a backup, but let's really address the ills of society that none of us have created here, but we have to recognize that they are there. And I think that's young people have a hard time grasping all of this. I have a hard time, but you know, the dialogue helps. I think it helped, and the inspiration helps. It helps them, but it also helps us.
Definitely. And Richard, yes, the dialogues do help, but actually leading to a policy change or an action step would definitely do good. So we don't come back 30 years later to be discussing the same, right? So yes. Rob, I saw you nodding your head a couple of times when Aaron was speaking.
Yeah, well, and actually, there's so much that all the presenters have said so far that I just want to underscore. I mean, I think your question, I'm going to start with Ariel. I mean, your question about what do you say to somebody who says that they're not racist? You know, I kind of think, well, that's the wrong question, right? Because to Parag's point, nobody wants to be the villain, right? Everybody wants to say all the reasons why they're not racist, right? So, but the real question is like, do you want to create a more just society, right? Which I think gets to fixing the system, which, you know, you can start kind of focusing on that. And we need to know our history. I mean, Ariel, just in what you had said a few minutes ago, I mean, I learned things that I didn't know, right? And I feel like every day, you know, I'm learning things, and a lot of times when I'm talking to, you know, to white folks, and you talk about the Tulsa Race Massacre, or the Atlanta Race Riot, or lynching, or redlining, or Jim Crow, or, you know, mortgage rate discrimination, right? All these things that we just weren't taught, right? And if you don't know kind of how we got here, how are you going to fix it, right? So I think in terms of, you know, with the question is like, okay, well, are you willing to learn? You know, why, you know, Danella, to your point, like, why are Black people traumatized, right? I mean, you got to understand that. You got to know the experiences that Aaron and Richard are talking about when they get pulled over for no reason other than being Black, right? And well, why is that, right? And you don't have to be, you know, I think a lot of times white people, when they say, well, I'm not a racist, they're like, okay, well, I'm not the cop who's going to kneel on George Floyd's neck. I'm not going to, you know, chase down Ahmaud Arbery. But that kind of then it's like, oh, well, I get a pass. Like, I don't have to fix this problem. But this is a problem the white people created, right? I mean, racism is a white problem to solve. It's not a problem the Black people can solve, right? Because we're the ones who are racist. And so, you know, Aaron, when he was talking about, I was nodding when he said it's not going to be probably solved in his lifetime. I mean, I think about my son. I've got a 12-year-old who, you know, the conversations that I have with him, I mean, first of all, the fact that we even have conversations about race is much different than what I experienced in my home growing up, right? And I love my parents and lots of virtues and lots of very positive things I've learned. But, you know, and again, in Miami, the Black-white race dynamic wasn't the same as it is in Atlanta, but still the messages that I got about race, you know, were commentary, and it's not like the N-word was being dropped or anything, but they were subtle, right? And there weren't a lot of, I can't think of many positive things at all that I heard about Black people growing up, right, in my home, right? And certainly not an understanding of, you know, what are the things that are keeping people down, right? I mean, I remember conversations about, oh, now they're trying to teach Black history in school. Like, we need to learn about our founding fathers. And instead of being like, well, let's understand the people who also live in this country with us, it was more like, oh, they're trying to take away our country. And I don't think that's the intent. It's just, we need to understand the systems that are in place, how we got here, so that as a society, we can move forward together. And, you know, and my son who's 12, I would love to think that this is going to be solved before he's an adult. It's not. Aaron's right? But hopefully in some of the conversations and things that we're having now, at least he'll when he gets into adulthood, can be much more aware of his whiteness, right? Because as I said before, I wasn't aware of my whiteness until I was an adult, because white people don't have to think about their color, right? And I forget who it was, Oren, who said like a 3, or no, it was actually Bragg, right? Who said a 3. Like, white people don't have to think about their color, right? And it wasn't until, again, the past probably 10 years or so when really started having conversations and started to understand kind of how our society is structured, that I started to feel a level of responsibility for trying to fix it. And I got a long way to go. So I'm.
And definitely we appreciate you to be a part of the conversation today and being candid about, the growing up in your times and how you're raising your kids. I think that matters a lot on what we teach our kids. Like they say, hate is a learned behavior. Definitely, I'm sure we can unlearn it too, which I want to go to Calissa and Danella on this question is probably Calissa and Oren because of education. And the next question, I want to go to Danella and Ariel. So Calissa and Oren, to what extent do improvements to education depend on us attaining education equity, right? I'm not talking about equality, I'm talking about equity. And how do parents of our students define and differentiate equality and equity? But goes back to what Rob was just saying, in what ways does the dominantly white culture impact the schools and classrooms? Do you want to start, Oren? And then Calissa, please follow. Oren, you have to unmute.
I think before I answer that, I just want to chime in on what the lady said earlier about my comments. It reminds me of a story where Zalona Kading was speaking to several thousand people at an event. And she talks about a story where she was on the plane with Martin Luther King, and she was sitting next to Martin Luther King, and a lady came up to Martin Luther King and asked him, was he Martin Luther King? And he said, yes, I am. And she spit on him. And he didn't do anything. And that's basically what I'm saying. We, the average person, okay, it would have been a fight on the plane and all that. So that's basically what I'm saying. I'm saying that we got to be cool, we got to be calm, we got to be collected. We can't do the first thing that pops in your head. The first thing that pops in your head is a trap, is inferior. And so my thing is to choose peace instead of violence. Back to your question, I think we all need to lock arms and realize that we all in this together. I'm not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. I was a state trooper for 6.5 years. I had the blue light, the badge, the bulletproof vest. But everybody I stopped, I treated them like the most important person in the world. We all are connected. I remember a story where I stopped a guy and he told me, he said, listen, I used to hate black people, but not anymore. He said, the way you treated me, it blew my mind. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you could have towed my car, you could have did this, you could have did that, but you just wrote me a ticket and let me go. And so that's what I said, because we all are one, we're interconnected. I am you and you are me. And so I think if we lock arms and embrace each other, and if we all come together as one, we can achieve the extraordinary.
Sorry, Nazir, can I just say
yes,
something?
Yes, please do. Go ahead, Parag, yes.
So I just want to note that today is the 50th anniversary of the first Pride March in New York, which commemorates the riots and the looting and the destruction of property at the Stonewall Inn when the cops raided a gay bar and a group of gay men and transgender women, mostly women of color, decided to fight back. And they fought back with everything they had, from throwing pennies and breaking shot glasses to throwing their purses at the cops. So while I completely respect what Oren is saying, and I get that you're coaching young people, and what you're trying to do, Oren, is you're trying to save their lives. You're saying, don't act a fool, don't pull a gun, don't talk back at the cop, because if you do, you could endanger your life. Got it. I think at this moment in time, we have to have a different conversation, which is when the cops are showing brutality towards us, wiping the spit off of our face isn't working. right? Putting our head down and being patient is not working. For 401 years, our tactics, kneeling, as Colin Kaepernick did not work. Rob, you mentioned you grew up in Miami. I don't know if folks know this. I learned it today. The phrase, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, comes not from Donald Trump's tweet a couple weeks ago. It comes from the police chief of Miami in 1967, giving his cops permission to shoot Black youngsters between the ages of 15 and 21 during the Christmas holidays because of a wave of crime. So I just want to be really clear that you can't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Peaceful protest, like the two men behind me, is absolutely a valid way to advance civil and human rights. But at some point, we have to show anger. We have to speak with anger. We have to feel anger. And it shouldn't just be the Black people who feel the anger. Until the rest of us become angry for them and use our privilege to say, I'm going to talk back to the cop and I'm going to speak out to the cop because I know my life will be protected, nothing will change.
And Parag well said. Kalissa, I'm going to come to you, but Parag, also remember that especially minorities like us do come from society. As we grew up back in India, we were always told to stay away from the courts, stay away from the police, stay away from the government, right? So it takes probably.
But let's not forget, we also burn stuff down too. Don't sugarcoat the history of India's independence or American independence. The Boston Tea Party and the Lucknow Sepoy Mutiny, those were riots. Those were burning property and fighting against the law enforcement, fighting against the police. We fought for our freedom using violent tactics too.
Yes, and yes, and rightfully so. As Richard has always said, why don't I see brown people in our marches more? So, Richard, that's one question you should put to all the attendees who are watching today. We need more brown people in our protests. So, Kalissa, so thank you, Parag, for bringing the history and similar occurrences, even whether east or the west. So, Kalissa, my continuing with our question was, how does the dominantly white culture impact our schools and classroom and the way that children are being raised?
Well, the field of education is in no way my ease. I can share my personal experience of going to a white elementary school. We had one Black child, one Black teacher, and the difference in what I learned in history, in music, in math, in pretty much every topic that I can think of. When I went to an integrated, we were bused. It was a magnet school. It was the first voluntarily integrated school in the United States, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the white kids were bused to the formerly Black school. And I learned so much. That's when our assemblies were just about teaching the white kids history, real history. And so that just having the information be full and complete instead of the perspective of one group of people. And then secondly, having, my principals in middle school, high school, my principals were Black, the counselors were all Black, the teachers were Black. Having people in authority that were African American made a difference in my education in a way I don't even know how to quantify.
Sure. So thank you so much, Kalissa. I think we got the gist of what you were trying to say. You got cut off a few seconds here and there, but definitely one question I did want to ask was, you said you teach white folks to unlearn racism. So does that include children as well?
No, I definitely teach adults that have children and that want to talk to their children about race. I tend to recommend for most white people, there's a lot of really good books now written by people or children that are really helpful. I think that most white people, we have so many holes in our racial education that it's difficult for us to just have a talk with our kids great job.
Sure, thank you so much. So let's move. Thank you so much, Calissa. Let's move to Ariel and Danella for the next question. Is about women, right? And you would think, of course, we have to talk about how is it different for women to face racism? So is racism different for men and women? For the reason we don't see many women authoritative figures or decision-making leadership roles, right? But most people don't think themselves as racists. So how do we break not just the system of racism, but also the genderism? And one of the attendees has asked, how do we handle racism towards Black women in the healthcare industry? So if you both can contribute. Go ahead, Danella. You're already smiling because you are coming from the healthcare field.
You first have to admit as a leader that you have a bias towards certain opportunities and certain leadership styles. Leaders develop leaders. So that's the opportunity to be developed, to be mentored, to be provided the tools necessary to grow and to be able to perform. Most people learn as they see and they can do, rather than what you kind of just say. So we have to have leaders, and the most oftentimes the highest percentage of leaders that I've seen and I've had to deal with were white males. We had to have white males have the opportunity to develop and sponsor and mentor and to get to know women of color, specifically for me as a Black woman, to be able to teach me and give me, that back office conversation that doesn't happen outside in the periphery around development. There are behaviors, there are ways of being and behaving that leaders expect other leaders to know how to behave. You won't know how to do those things if you're not having the opportunity to be mentored. So that's the one way. The other way is, our racism is so structural and so legislated and so ingrained that oftentimes you're thinking that you have this amazing diversity and inclusion program, but nobody is checking in. And when I mean no one, I mean HR. Like the leadership is not checking in with the population and specifically with me to see, are you getting the things that you need to get from your leader? Do you have opportunity? Do you see that you have opportunity with this organization? And how can we create that opportunity for you? What does that look like? No one's checking in with me to get that kind of feedback. So in order for me to grow and develop, you got to get to know me, right? And a lot of that is around building trust within the organization. And so to answer the question, I think if leaders that have the ability to decide who's next in line for those leadership opportunities, take a real opportunity to circumspect, do they have integrity around developing a person of color, a woman of color? How many women of color have they invested in, African-American women? And to take a look at that, not that it's a quota, but really honestly say, am I doing what I need to do to develop the next line of leaders? And those leaders represent what this country looks like.
And I remember as you were talking probably 7 to 8 years ago, and I know you were looking for a promotion into the vice president of the department, and then probably didn't go through, and then you had to leave the company. So I can imagine and understand the trauma of how much you've invested, and then you don't get the position just because either you're a female or you are a woman of color.
I think men have conversations about us that just snuffs out the fire around growth and development. And what you're speaking of is, yeah, this company I worked with would have made history had I been promoted to that next line level of leadership. And oftentimes when you're dealing with bias, at least for me, it feels like, okay, I've done everything you want me to do. Now I'm dealing with these subjective, innocuous kind of hurdles that feel like a glass ceiling. You don't see them, but you feel them, right? And, or it's like all or nothing. Leadership requires that you create a space, a safe space for people to make mistakes, because we develop. Human beings, that's how we grow and we develop, right? A mistake is not a bad thing. If I've never done this before, why would I know how to do it, right? And so on the other side of a mistake is the opportunity that you have, that now you have what's called experience. Oftentimes we have this very quiet, secretive scorecard that people are keeping in their heads, keeping score around us as it relates to, oh, she doesn't speak to her audience, or, oh, she wants to be liked. We don't know if she has what it takes. She wants to be liked. And I'll say this to you, those are two things that came back as feedback. My scorecards were impeccable, but I have to develop consensus. If you talk to me about my leadership style, I would say I'm probably a cheerleader. I'm all about you understanding why I'm asking you to do what you need to do and how can we do it together. That's not a deficit. That's oftentimes I have to lead that way anyway, because I don't have the privilege of a white male. I can't go in there and cuss you out. You know, I'll go to HR. So I've developed effective ways of enrolling my direct reports into my conversation around performance. And what does it look like to be excellent at what you do, right? So again, when I'm dealing, at least in my experience, which is probably why I created my own opportunity. I'm the CEO and president of my organization. I have amazing people with all kinds of wonderful skill sets that lend themselves to making sure that we deliver services to the community. And I'm having the time of my life. But how many of us within corporate America have had to leave it to create our own opportunities? Thank God we do. We have the skill set to do it. But based on, you know, all these biases that we have to deal with that are ingrained in that person's head, who's responsible for our next promotion, but is unwilling to give it. I hope I answered.
Definitely. Thank you. Such an inspiring story that you didn't give up, and you created opportunities for yourself and others. So kudos to you right there, Danella. I'm so proud to be your friend and continue to do more and learn more. So Ariel, tell us, continuing with the same question, do you think that the racism differs being a man or a woman? And probably I want you to see, even maybe you've have seen it happen for other Black African-American women, or how have you addressed it?
I've lived outside of the corporate environment all of my life. I've always been in the arts and the nonprofit, and working with my husband in agriculture. So I don't have a good perspective on the mainstream structure that has to do with that. Just from observation, what I have seen a lot of that has just impressed me beyond measure is the strength and leadership of African-American women, just off of their own, like Daniela was saying, their own ability to create their structures and to lead them, and even my stepdaughter, who is Daniela's age, I watched her get herself into the Naval Academy with no help from parents, and get herself through Georgetown Law School, work in the government, and, then take a job as a consultant with the government, and it seems to be a matter of individual determination and individual strength. I mean, I don't know white men that have taken on the role of mentoring. Rob, probably you could answer some of that. You know, I've never seen a white male mentor anybody except other white guys. Excuse me, I'm a different generation. But, you know, when I came up, you know, just the idea of women achieving anything on their own was pretty much off the table. I was sent to college to get a degree in education or home economics and find a husband, period. I didn't. But that was, you know, that was one generation before most of you who are on this panel. And, you know, I'm watching little girls of all of the races at least have role models held up and have supportive fathers. But I don't know. I really don't know this, you know, what structure exists or what impulses exist. And I would love to hear, you know, Rob say something back to that, because you probably do know. But I need to leave it there.
Rob, I do have the next question is for you and Parag, but go ahead and you can continue to respond.
Well, I'm going to say something that probably many folks on this call find it's the inverse of what you say. Like, I don't speak for all white men, right? Like, I'm in the same way that if well, what do black people think? They think lots of different things because they're all individuals, right? You know, mentoring stuff under any circumstances, I would like to think that I have mentored some of the people under me. Frankly, some of the people who have reported me know a whole lot more about stuff than I have. So I've learned in some ways as much from them as they have from me. I also run a pretty small, or it's a pretty flat 8-person organization, right? So I think in corporate America, you're going to find different people behaving differently. I mean, I just think that's the reality. And on a bell curve, it's probably more like what you described and what Donella has observed, and kind of just in the same way that we can, we could find the African American who's made it and therefore try to pretend that there's not systemic issues at play that's holding everybody else down. We can find white men who have mentored successfully people of color and then try to pretend that, you know, across the board is probably not happening as much as it needs to.
I also think my experience, Rob, in the face of my excellence, I come up with against white rage. You know, I should behave a certain way, talk a certain way. I'm so proud of my legacy. I'm so proud. My father was a 1968 Olympian, right? He's career military. I come from like an amazing space and an amazing story. So it's just exhausting. Some of it too, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, what came to me was, as a woman, as a Black woman, I'm born into this conversation, I inherited it. So hopefully I get it right. I have to be twice as good to be considered half as good. Mm-hmm. So there's no equality in that conversation. And I walk in, and a lot of us may walk into this space that we have to come up against structures we have to do, or it's so complex. So some of it is just having these crucial conversations, getting to know each other on a human basis and not being concerned about what did I just say and did it land appropriately. Is that, you know, you're trying to understand me, you're trying to get to know me, and I'm trying to get to know you, and we're building trust and relatedness. But it's exhausting that we have to be perfect, because we're not. And I'm thinking of President Obama. A lot of the discourse that came from his presidency and administration and what he did, thank goodness, was that he was the first, you know, and he had to be so perfect, and he had to talk perfectly and figure everything out and never make a mistake. And that's just exhausting. First of all, it's impossible, but it's exhausting and it's not fair. So I appreciate the fact that you mentored and taking my feedback. Hopefully you will take somebody today and call them and say, hey, I want to mentor you. The other component to mentorship is sponsorship. You know, the difference is you are a senior leader, and what you say, if you say chair, it shows up. You create, you transform, and you manifest whatever happens in that organization because you call the shots. Well, you have conversations about me because I haven't reached that level, I'm not in the room, that you could sponsor me. You can say my name and you can volunteer my services to get me on that project that I wouldn't get to unless I was a white male, okay? Or you sponsored me in that way. So that's the other component I don't want to walk over. The sponsorship that happens more often between white males, that should really happen in the space specifically for me as a Black woman.
So
I knew I was going to learn a lot from this panel. So you all definitely given me, got to hold the mirror up here and think harder about that one.
Yes, and I don't know if you remember, Danella, but there was a time when we all were in leadership positions, and you were the co-chair of an asthma coalition that our department was leading, and we had Richard Johnson, and so Rob, it was ironic that both of our good people, good friends, but they would come individually to me separately and talk about each of their entitlement and be raged and be angry at each other. I just locked them up in one room and I said, go sort it out. You have working together, you have so much more to offer. And at a point it came, Rob, that they started becoming best of the friends and started fighting with me. So that was a wonderful experience of how to unite and build bridges.
I think the conversation, as I recall it, we had an amazing team. And Richard is a boomer, 72 years of age, white male, German, and we would have never, ever worked together had it not been for these amazing public health initiatives that Nazira oversaw in her role at Fulton County Health Department. That's a little different. That's just us trying to figure out our backgrounds, our likes or dislikes. And I call that productive conflict. Productive conflict is necessary. You know what happens on the other side of productive conflict? The fact that we were a part of a $9 million grant, and then we oversaw one of the most successful coalitions related to asthma health outcomes for Georgia, came out of that kind of a back and forth. But he's one of my best friends. And we have actually more in common than we don't, which gets back to my original point, because we trust and love each other at this point.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
Yes, love and trust. And the next question I want to go to is Parag and Richard is, let's talk about changing the narrative, right? So it's always, as growing up or as being here, we hear the terms, be afraid of Black people, us versus them, and individuals are at fault, they are bad, they're committing crimes, so they need to be protected. And we keep hearing the themes, news, TV, friends, parties, right? So that's why we need the policing. That's why we need the policing. We need to fund the police department. So Parag and Richard, how do we change that narrative of that dominant narrative, right? Us versus them. I think that's very, very necessary at these times. Parag, and then Richard, please.
I think we start by being honest about where the narrative has come from and who has written the narrative. So earlier, Danella talked about the term quota. And I worked at the US Department of Labor. I enforced the laws around affirmative action and non-discrimination in the workplace. This was an agency created out of the civil rights movement when Andrew Young and Martin Luther King went to the White House and said, civil rights without jobs and economic opportunity will be meaningless. We have to have a viable way to employ Black people. And so these agencies were created. And then I learned that in the 1970s and 80s, conservative politicians, pollsters, came up with the term quota. Affirmative action was never a quota. It was never a floor or a ceiling for this is the number of Black people, this is the number of women you have to hire. But what they did is they created campaign ads that literally showed a white hand taking away something from a black hand, because they wanted to create fear among the white majority that your job or your place in a school of higher education was going to be taken away by a less deserving, less qualified black person. And the key in the law was never less deserving or less qualified. It was equally qualified, equally deserving people should get the job, and we should prioritize diversity in the workplaces because it serves the greater good, because it makes for better workplaces, it makes for better schools. And so if we want to talk about changing the narrative, I think we have to address where the narrative came from, and then we have to do what Ariel said earlier, which is not just change policies and regulations, but change who is the person in charge, who is in the room, who is making the decision, who is speaking. The fact that President Obama for 8 years was the voice of our government, both at home and abroad, changed the narrative of what a black leader looks like, how a black person leads. But it's not enough to just do it with the president. You have to do it across the board. So I work at MasterCard, which is a Fortune 500 company. We, in response to the murder of George Floyd, did like what a lot of companies did. We put out a statement. We finally got around to saying the words Black Lives Matter. I think we took too long to say that. And I made the decision as a senior leader at that company that I was not going to share that statement. I was not going to post it on my LinkedIn and say, good for my company for doing this, because it was just words. It was meaningless. And it was coming from from white people and brown people, but not black voices. And then on Juneteenth, our CEO put out a statement of solidarity where he laid out specific actions that we were going to take as a company to become anti-racist. And one of those actions is that in the next 5 years, we're going to increase the number of black people at the VP or higher level by 50%. We are going to invest in training programs for black executives and high potential black leaders in our company. Very specific actions of what are we going to do to make sure that the leadership in 5 years looks very different than the leadership now. And I'll end with one last point, and that is this. The only way things are going to get changed, the only way things are going to get better, and the only way that this time is going to be different than all the times before is if we change who has the power. And sometimes power has to be taken, and sometimes power has to be ceded. And so my question to all my white friends in this moment, the ones who are standing in allyship with us and saying Black Lives Matter, is what are you going to do to give up some of your power to a black person? Because that means giving up board seats. It means giving up positions. It means ceding power in a meaningful way. And that's what's going to have to change this time.
Definitely. So Richard, I want you to continue answering how do we change the narrative, us versus them? And then I'll also answer this question along with Erin, which is how have race and other forms of oppression been used as political tools? We touched on it here and there, but I want us to get on it.
So I think we have to cancel the narrative that is out there. And it's been employed in so many ways. It's almost like, Black people really have been hidden in plain sight. Instead, we have this creature that has been created that's ignorant, that's lazy, that's dishonest, that's hypersex, that's all of these things. That's what you read about. We were excised from all of the history books. You have to give credit to the Daughters of the Confederacy who impacted what was in school books to exclude Black people. So even coming up, as a kid, we had Negro History Week. And so all we knew about was Ralph Bunche, Marian Anderson. We didn't even know about Charles Drew because he had done something so spectacular that could not be mentioned in history books because that would belie, the narrative that Black people are basically worthless. So I think we are making progress in that respect, but we have to be intentional about repairing. Again, reparations comes from the word repair, and repairing means being assertive to engage and educate all of these things. I mean, Charles Drew is just not a school in East Atlanta. He was a great scientist. That impacts everything. Every hospital in the world, is impacted by what he contributed to America. So I think the road to recovery is there, but it must be consistent. I was at a rally yesterday, reminding people that the Montgomery bus boycott, they walked and hitchhiked for 381 days. They have to be intentional. It's got to be more than these last 2 or 3 weeks of marching. Now let's come together and continue to work on all these things we should do. And some of it's going to be painful. Those people who marched in Montgomery, it was painful. They walked for miles every day to go to work. And so it's going to be painful. I think, in Mississippi, they voted to remove that Confederate battle emblem from the flag. That means that Georgia is now ground zero for racism in America. Our policy is racist. We home, not only home to the largest shrine to white supremacy in the history of the world, but they are still celebrating everything. Our legislators just left. They passed a hate crime bill, but they passed 2 more bills, that are horrendous. One, to protect police when they commit horrendous acts, like against Rayshard Brooks and like the 2 students, Atlanta University students that were tased during the first week of the protest. So, we do have to counter the narrative in order to repair the narrative. We have to be intentional about that. As you said, another thing is that what we are doing at the Atlanta NAACP, we've created an app, a Black Business Directory, because part of that repair is removing the stigma of being a Black person in business. And so, when our concept is to let NAACP branches across the country actually vet these businesses, that these are Black businesses. Not that they're great, not that they're bad or good, whatever, but they are actually owned by a Black business. And I think that's part of, that will be an impactful thing toward restoring equal credibility across our understanding of in our society.
Very well said indeed. Aaron, do you want to continue the answering for how does race and other forms of oppression been used as a political tool? Being a policy student, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, you can see, I think, and I don't want to be partisan, because a lot of Democratic representatives aren't, doing the best, in terms of representing the people that their constituency. But I think for a long time, the Republican Party has racialized and what's the word that I'm looking for? They've used race as a tool to get votes, and they've been doing this. For a very long time, but particularly since the 90s, with the Republican Revolution. They've been doing it since Nixon and Reagan with the war on drugs, but the Republican Revolution of 94 really set the tone for what we're seeing now in terms of racial division and dehumanizing, people of color, whether they're Black, Hispanic, Asian Americans, it doesn't matter. I think that race has been used like for welfare. For instance, our social programs, back in the 90s, they had this image of the welfare queen who is, scamming welfare payments, scamming food stamp payments, and taking advantage of the system, when really that happens less than 1% of the time. The reality is that Black people are not these things, but politicians have capitalized on these images of us in the media. They've capitalized on these images of us that are portrayed in our educational books, and they've just capitalized generally on the miseducation of the American people. The ignorance of history of the American people. Like the Confederate battle flag, for instance. Republicans, like I said, I don't want to keep politicizing it, but a lot of politicians have used that as a tool because they make it seem like, they're taking away white heritage, by taking away this battle flag. When in reality, like somebody said earlier, that's a flag that represents treason. It's not just a racist flag. It's obviously racist because the Civil War was fought over slavery, but that flag is un-American in the most truest form, And so I think that we need to put laws in place to sort of not, I don't want to censor anybody, but I think that we need to start being more intentional about how we allow campaigns to talk to people, and how we allow them to put out false and untrue misinformation. So
definitely fake
Can
news.
I say something to?
Yes, go ahead, Danella.
Also,
Yes.
Aaron, that is so amazing, and you bring up some great points. But do you think it's just about laws? Because we got a lot of legislation, but how do we enforce them? Because I always say to myself, you can't legislate hate away.
No, I thought the question was more or less about, how race has been used as a tool in politics, but I definitely think it's more than legislation, or I think that as a policy student, I naturally am going to believe that policy can serve as a lot of substantial good. But I think it's how you use policy. You don't just write a law and then, call it a day. No, you have to enforce that law, and you have to be intentional when you write policy, So if you want to eradicate racism at the lowest level, you need to have education on that in schools, in our public schools. That comes from creating legislation. So I think how we're going about policy right now is completely wrong. The hate crime bill that Georgia just wrote, it's completely empty. It has no form of enforcement whatsoever. It's the truth. It's just a bunch of words. And then they made 2 other bills to nullify it.
Right.
Right.
Yep, I agree. And again, there must be penalty, I think, to your point. Morris Dees in Alabama sued the KKK, won the suit, and penalized them economically, really to destroy the apparatus. Right now, all of our politicians are protected by their actions, because if in law. I mean, our governor kicked off millions of people off the road. No personal responsibility, and he was rewarded to be the governor. He was the Secretary of State. We have to. That's why we gotta be willing to make sustained efforts that may be painful, which include economic boycotts if necessary. Because I believe the NCAA should never play another tournament game in Georgia until they change. And we have to be willing, and that's going to hurt some people. Some people, when I first came out against Stone Mountain, one of the politicians said, well, some people are going to lose their jobs. Yeah, you're right. But some people are going to lose their lives because Stone Mountain is there and continues to promote racism and promote terror against Black people. It's gonna take something. I mean, it's just like going to college was a sacrifice, to get something better on the other end. We got to make sacrifices, I think.
Definitely. And so recently a police chief from my city had a nice post out initially. In the post said, of course, we don't do racial profiling and all that. But at some point in his post, he also added that he doesn't believe in Black Lives Matter because what it's teaching is to go and kill police officers. Richard, just can you elaborate on that? So we're just clear, because I really wanted to address, and basically what I'm asking you is, what is Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. So Black Lives Matter was just a reaction to say Black Lives Matter too, not just white lives. And that police chief used what I call the defense of denial, as if there was no problem. And so why are you saying this? Because we really don't have a problem. And I get it all the time. I got a letter last week that said, I don't know why y'all worried about, why you concerned about, why you think that the Civil War was about race, because it was only in the second year of the Civil War that slavery became an issue. Are you kidding me? They wrote about it 4 months before they formed the Confederacy. And you know, and it's but there's denial in order to defend the indefensible. And I think they understood. I mean, that's why as soon as the war was over, the denial that what the issue of the war was obscured in all these monuments. Kind of, you know, even the one they took down in DeKalb County last week, they said, well, you know, our the honor and, you know, never mention slavery. You know, the bottom line is we lost the war, but our cause was just. And what was the cause? They don't define it. They can't define it. You know, states' rights comes up and they talk about tariffs, but you know, the Confederacy had tariffs. So, you know, they can't say, well, you can't have, what do you mean you can't have tariffs? You need taxes to operate a government. So it's just all about denial and a way to deny. I mean, we see that on front and center coming out of the White House every day. You know, it's, you hide, you just continue to lie, basically. And that's what, in order to defend what cannot be defended.
Definitely. So thank you for clearing that up. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak on just like what Black Lives Matter means to me, because I actually have the shirt on right now. But like it's I think it's a movement, and it's sad that it's kind of like this, but it's a movement to humanize us. It's a movement to get people to see us as people just like them, you know. And I think another big proponent of the movement is to get out of is to deconstruct all these racial myths, you know, that have been created by the Daughters of Confederacy, by the writers of all our history books in school, and by the people in power. You know, the overall goal and what this movement isn't some militant, you know, terrorist group that they've been labeling us as. You know, it's not some political left agenda, liberal agenda. It's a human rights movement. It's a basic movement to say, hey, it does not matter the color of your skin. You deserve to be treated like a person, you know, and because for too long, Black people have not been treated like a person, you know, we have to say it. We have to say it over and over. And that's why it is true. And that is why, you know, the movement Black Lives Matter is here, and it is here to stay.
And definitely, yes. I'm sure Parag and people like myself are continuing to get the other minorities as allies to be a part of this movement. So definitely. The next question is for Oren and Kalissa. I know, Oren, you've been in the law enforcement field for some time, but Kalissa, if you can add with the white adults that you've been talking to previously. So what more can be done to eliminate racial profiling and promote the public's trust in police? Or can you unmute? Yes.
I think the magic word is trust. I think everything is built on trust. I think we need to have training. Officers need to be trained. Like I say, it's not the law, it's the mindset. I think laws are what they are, but I think we got to change the heart. You know, use your heart, your head, then your hand. Because a lot of times when you make a decision, people use their head. I think you got to use your heart. I mean, when I was in law enforcement, I got into some pretty big fights, and it could have ended another way had I not used my heart. And so that's why I always go back to, you know, you got to think it through, because sometimes the first thing that comes to your head may be inferior. And so you got to use your heart, your head, then your hand. So I think if we get more training, we got to bring empathy back into the game. Empathy is a powerful game. There's sympathy and then there's sympathy. Sympathy is when you see someone and you say, Mr. Jones, I see you finna jump off of that building. If I were you, I wouldn't jump. That's sympathy. Empathy is when you say, Mr. Jones, I see you finna jump off of that building. I'll jump with you. And so empathy is putting yourself in that person's shoes. So I tell my 4 Black male sons, hey, here's how we gonna deal with this. I need you to come home alive. I need you to respect authority. We ain't fighting back. We gonna do the right thing. Fighting back is stupid. Okay? Stupid. Don't do it. So I'm looking at TV with my boys, I'm saying, listen, boys, here we go. We're gonna pause the tape. Let's role play. The officer say this to you. How you gonna deal with this? Dad, I'm gonna do this. No, we ain't doing that. That's inferior. We're gonna do it this way. So role playing, training, engaging people, showing people, play what if games. If this happened to you, what would you do? They go, oh, no, I do. No, if you do that, you lose. If you do this, be kind, be kind, respect authority. When you smile at someone, they will smile back at you. So you can break a lot of problems. You can diffuse the situation by using your head. I diffused a lot of things. People go, oh my God, man, I like you. See, you can change the game. I'm a game changer. I show people how to change the paradigm, how to change the attitude, because there's cause and effect. You do this, it's gonna cause that. That's why you got to be cool, calm, and collect. Because then you cool, calm, and collect, then you can diffuse the situation and you can change it like an officer. The other day, they were riding, and he said, "You know what? Here's what I'm gonna do, guys. I'm gonna put my shield down and I'm gonna join y'all." And they made a party. They started dancing. So he turned the crowd into a friend. That's all I'm saying. Get your head in the game.
Definitely. So, Oren, but I'm just worried that why haven't officers been trained, and why are we talking about training officers at this point? Isn't that why they've been taken into their jobs because of the training or the cultural diversity training, or it's something that needs to be taken?
Let me give you an example. When I was an Alabama State Trooper, we had 6 months of training. And I talk to people all the time, do a lot of dialogue. And we were trained not to do crazy stuff like that. I mean, we trained about being respectful, being humble, being kind. I mean, I just don't know where their training coming from, because I know how I was trained. And it's 6 months training. I don't know if the other ones have that much training. We had 6 months training. I signed documents that thick before I got that gun. I mean, it was like, you got this gun, but we don't want you to do this. So it's very caring about life, before you use this gun. So I just think some of the other officers not getting trained right. I really do. I know the local officers not getting the training that we got, but we had 6 months training before we did anything.
Sure, I'll allow 10-second comments from Danila, and then I want to go to Kalissa. Go ahead, Danila.
Would you consider just thinking about, I think of Delandro Castile, I think of Tamar Rice, actually think of George Floyd. Is there some sort of sinister lack of regard for life for some of the police officers, that when they encounter a Black person that they're so afraid, or they don't like Black people? What are your comments around that? You just simply can't diffuse something in that space. What are you?
Right. Well, it's that go back to training and empathy. He's got to have empathy. You got to, everyone you meet is you. And one of the things I did when I was a trooper, everyone I stopped, I treated them like the most important person in the world, because that's part of my training. And it goes back to training, and it may be racial bias, or maybe just not aware, or he's not in that community, and so he's not aware how things work. So I think a lot of it is ignorance. Our biggest enemy has never changed. Its name is ignorance. We don't know.
Might be they don't belong to be in the law enforcement.
Well, we should be screening people, right? The same way you can't get a secret clearance in the government if you don't pass a psychological test, then we shouldn't be allowing people to carry a gun and be law enforcement officers if they haven't been able to prove that they are mentally stable to do that job. And with all due respect, 6 months of training is insane. 6 months? My mother was a psychiatrist, trained for 12 years, medical school, residency, internship, and dealt with schizophrenic patients who were violent. Never once in her years as a 4'11" woman did she need a gun or a taser to put a violent psychiatric patient under control. 12 years of training for that job, 6 months for law enforcement to carry a gun. I don't believe that they're scared. I don't believe that 140-pound Elijah McClain walking down a street and listening to his AirPods was a threat to any of those 3 big police officers who restrained him and murdered him. They're not afraid. I think we have people who get into law enforcement because they have a power trip, because they want to carry the gun and they want to be the powerful. I know these guys. These are the guys that bullied me in Central Texas as a kid. They became the cops because they wanted the power. We need to screen those people out. We need to train them a lot more than 6 months. I hope that they can learn empathy. I'm just not sure that empathy is teachable.
I don't think
Definitely.
so.
So I
either.
want to hear, go ahead, Richard. I do want to hear from Kalissa though.
Yeah,
Richard, quick.
So yes, I don't think empathy is teachable. First of all, again, I think we need to stop, deconstruct what we have now and start all over again. I got a client who's a clinical psychologist who at one time was a subcontractor at the Atlanta Police Department. She says she quit in the first week because they weren't serious about psychological evaluations. They were not serious about weeding out people who are obviously psychologically unfit for such a powerful position, a badge and a gun. So we need to start all over again. I think we gotta bring in those professions into the public safety apparatus. What we have cannot be fixed. It must be destroyed and reconstructed all over again.
Definitely. I see Parag clapping and now most of you nodding there. Kalissa, we want to hear from you. You go ahead. Yes,
I
go
would
ahead.
just agree with that 100%. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so she did say she agrees with that. Rob, any follow-up from the discussion on training and law enforcement from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, law enforcement is not my expertise. Yeah. I do agree, though, that so, and I forget who said it before about when you call 911, you only get the ambulance, the fire truck, or the police officer, and that there are a whole lot of situations that neither of those three are equipped to handle. And so, I think it's easy to kind of politicize the whole defunding the police. I think very few people mean we shouldn't have police. It's just that we need police who are doing an appropriate job, and then make sure we're putting resources into other types of support and service to address, different types of situations.
And I bet that's what it definitely means. So Parag, let's talk about the diversity in the police force. I want you to very quickly address, because what I did in my city was about community policing. So I went into my city police department and took 2 years of a bi-weekly 2-hour course and graduated from their community police academy thing. So I was able to go for ride shares and, help with vacation checks and all that. And so do you think the police department diversity should represent the diversity of the population it serves? Quickly, if you can comment on that. Unmute, please.
I believe we should have more diversity in it. I believe we need to control the police unions and the amount of power that they have. I believe that the sheriff and the commissioner of police should be elected positions. And if they're not doing their job, you should be able to vote them out of office. I believe mayors and city council should have more regulatory authority over the funding and the implementation. And one last thing, because I know we're almost out of time, I just want to say to Aaron, I get the need to not try and be partisan, but in this moment, I think we all need to be partisan, because yesterday, the president of the United States tweeted a video of a man on a golf cart who shouted white power. So we are in crazy times right now. These are not normal times. There's an election happening on November 3rd. I need every young person, Aaron, of your generation, to be registered to vote, to know how to vote in this election, and to, for the love of God, vote for Joe Biden. I know the Democrats aren't perfect. I know that we're not always right on the issues, but my goodness, if we have 4 more years of this, we will not survive. This country will not survive with 4 more years of this. So we need to get political, and that starts with local officials, who's running the city department, who's running the police department, and who's funding them. But we've got to elect Democrats this time.
Definitely.
So,
And I just want to speak on that really quick, Nazira. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It's just, and I definitely agree with you, from the top down, especially in local elections, I think we do need to be voting Democrat. But I think we made a really big blunder on the presidential level. At the presidential level, I mean, I'll just speak on the sentiment of a lot of people my age, is that we don't see, we see that Trump is, a very terrible president, but the prospects of Biden is not very much brighter. This is a man who said poor kids is just as, smart as white kids. This is a man, who has consistent racial blunders I mean, he feels entitled to our vote. And so, I mean, you heard him on the radio show saying
entitled for the vote. I think he works very hard for every vote. I think there's a reason why his campaign turned around in South Carolina with the strong support of the Black community. But at this point, Aaron, what I'm saying in person, Aaron, is we have two choices.
Politics.
There is no other choice. Like, there's no redoing the primary. You've got Joe Biden and you've got Donald Trump. And unless one of them dies between now and November 3rd, those are your two options. So I get that you're not crazy about him. He wasn't my first choice either, but here's what we got to do. Elections are won by enthusiasm. And if young people and if Black folks aren't incredibly enthusiastically voting for Joe Biden and voting not just against Donald Trump, we will lose this election and the situation will get much, much worse because it will empower white supremacists in a way that you will not be able to believe. If you don't believe me, just go back and look at the history books. Look what happened when Hitler was in power. It wasn't the first 4 years he was in power. It was the next 4 years when the crazy shit started happening. So excuse my language, but we've got to stop that.
I hear you, but I would have to disagree with that.
And yes, go ahead, Danelle.
I think we don't understand how dire it is for someone to lack leadership in the greatest office in the world. This is a leadership deficit. It's the root of it. So if we get back and forth, and I'm not here to tell anybody to vote for whoever you want to vote for, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. I don't know who said that on the panel, but that's how we live, leaders. We understand that we course correct, right? We just course correct. Okay, this gentleman is in office. This gentleman, I'm a Black woman. He does not resonate. Nothing he says resonates with me. In no way do I think, I'm going to say it. I believe he's a racist. I'm going to say it. I want to be on record as saying I believe he's a racist. So why would I vote for another racist to be in office another 4 years? The other component is we got a two-party system. That's what we're working within. We're not working outside of that. I wished it was something else. But so if that's what we're working with and we're leaders and we course correct, it means that we need to make a different choice this next go around.
So yes, definitely. I want to take a few more minutes just for the closing comments. We appreciate all your passionate opinions and the facts that have been laid out. But I do want to very briefly address the hope for a change, right? How does the next 50 years look like? So if your closing comments can include that where there is hope for change, no matter how small individually or community-wide, that we can see that we're not going to be talking about race issues or another George Floyd in the many coming years later. Ariel, let's start with you.
I think maybe I'll close with my opening wish, which is in the next 50 years, we learn to speak to each other openly, directly, comprehensively, with ears that are ready to hear and understand and work towards something that is win-win for everybody at the table. And I would like to see everybody at the table proportionately to their numbers in this country, or, maybe in more numbers than they are in this country. I'd like to see the white supremacy broken. And by that, I simply mean the government structures and the electoral system. I would like to see equity. And whether it comes in the next 50 years, God help us, I hope it does.
Definitely.
Thank you for inviting me for this. It's been fascinating.
Thank you so much, Ariel, for joining us this Sunday evening. Rob?
And thank you again for the opportunity to be on the panel. I mean, I think that, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that Ariel's right. We have to create safe spaces to really talk. Right, and to really, and not anymore, not talk, to listen, right, to understand, because, and I'm optimistic that there is a lot more, I think, motivation and desire to do the right thing on behalf of many white people right now than there has been in the past. And I think there's a growing awareness and a belief that racism is real. And I think a lot of that, you know, again, I forget who said the cell phones. The fact that we are catching this on video and you cannot look at George Floyd die and deny that racism is real. Like, there is a problem that we as white people cannot avoid, right? And Aaron, to you, you know, the credit to you and your colleagues, and shoot, my 12-year-old son who leads cheers at protests, right? I do think that the younger generation is more aware of this and motivated to do something. So I'm encouraged there, but it is going to be a hard battle because so many of the things that are holding Black people down, we can't see. You can't capture it on a cell phone because it's policy, it's structural racism, it's how banks give money or don't, right? I mean, it's just so many things that we're gonna have to work really hard to win the hearts and minds of people. And that's either, you know, the hearts are gonna come either from a strong moral compass, and if that comes from your faith or wherever you get that from, we gotta tap into that, right? And then, you know, from the mind standpoint, we got to believe that we genuinely all do better when we all do better, right? And I forget who said it before about, you know, taking away power from whites, and there's truth to that. But if that's the paradigm, right? If that's the belief that the only way we can make progress is for white people to have to give up, as opposed to we can all get better by giving more people access to power and access to wealth and everything else, that if it's all about taking away, it's going to be tough. So I think we've got to figure out how do we really help people understand, and there are people much smarter than me who have the data and the economics and everything else, but when we all do better, we all do better.
Very well said indeed, Rob, and you are in a position to start from where you are, and I'm sure you've already started much way back in being inclusive, equity, and listening. So we wish you all the best with your Atlanta Beltline Partnership organization.
And we need to be intentional about, as we build out the Beltline, make sure it's part of an equitable economic recovery, and that we're intentional about making sure as those jobs come and as that money comes into communities, that we put the programs, the policies, the partners in place so the people of color and low-income folks get access to them. And if we don't,
very well said. Wishing you the best. Kalissa, your closing comments, please. Yes.
Okay. I guess I have hope that if white people start spending more time unlearning racism and less time arguing that we're not racist, I think we could actually get someplace. I know for myself that when I admitted to myself I have racist behaviors, I have racist thoughts, so much energy was freed up to actually take action against that racism in myself and in the world. So is my hope for other white people, that let go of all the energy of shielding off that word and just start working on unlearning it and then doing it in the world.
And so if anyone is interested who is watching and wants to reach out to you, is that possible?
Sure.
To unlearn the racism?
Yeah, I do. I have a monthly membership where white people can do a variety of activities in an ongoing way, a month at a time. It's not just about reading things, it's actually about taking action in ourselves and in the world. And I suggest. Very
well. Thank you so much, Kalissa, for those opportunities. Richard, and I saw you grin very well when Kalissa was speaking, so I assume you're agreeing with her. Yes, Richard, can you unmute?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I would just say, you know, there is no perfection. There are no perfect people, no perfect leaders, no perfect organization, no perfect structures. And of course, there are no perfect politicians. They are all imperfect, just like the rest of us. But there are no perfect candidates. But this is where we live. We live in imperfection, and we have to work toward achieving the objectives that we think makes life better for us and for humanity. And sometimes those choices not easy. But particularly among Black people, we gotta get in the game. We have to vote. In Georgia in 2016, only 48% of Black males went to vote. Only 62% of Black females voted in the presidential election. Well, normally women are over 70%. The Black apathy about that election gave us Donald Trump. We cannot afford that. If Black people had voted in the same percentage in Georgia as white people, Trump would have lost by over 100,000 votes. This is just the number where we are. We have to, again, we are not perfect. Biden is Trump. Biden was not my first choice, but I'm 4 square behind him. And all of the other things on the ballot have to be paid attention to. Who's the sheriff? Who's the district attorney? Who's the county commissioner? This is the political system we live in, and we have to participate. We cannot wait on God. God did not deliver us from 250 years of bondage and another 155 years of Jim Crow. Prayer will not get it. We got to go to work. Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I say injustice anywhere is a call to action everywhere.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Richard, for those wise words. Danella?
I think the call to action happens inside of language, and we have to be willing to have these conversations where we call it what it is. It may not be politically correct, it may be shocking at times, but we need to say and identify what it is. And so I appreciate you, Nazira, for asking me and having me on this amazing panel, and I am honored to be amongst all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danella. We appreciate you as well. Parag?
Yeah, I want to echo what Danella said. I'm really honored to be on this panel with all of you. Look, we in this country don't have a common religion or a common language or a common tradition or history. We are a diverse melting pot from people all over the world. But the thing that unifies us, the thing that made my parents back in 1972 choose America out of all the countries in the world that they could have gone to, why they came here, was they believed in the democratic system. They believed in that pathway to opportunity, that even if it isn't real, it is part of our ideals. We're always striving towards that. And the way that we express that ideal, the commonality that ties all of us together, is our democratic process. And so I would echo what Richard said. I would like to see over the next, not 50 years, over the next 5 years, to see more intergenerational cooperation, where young people can teach us new and fresh ways of thinking about the battle ahead, how to rethink and reimagine our government structures, and that the older generation can teach the young folks the power of civic participation, of showing up and voting, not just in the presidential election, but every election, every primary, every bond election, every municipal election, because that generation that Richard is talking about, that generation, they fought and died for that right to vote. And so when I hear these numbers that Richard shared about the number of people who didn't vote in 2016, it makes me wonder, our people today have the appreciation for the sacrifice that was made, not just for the Aaron to be able to vote, but for me to be able to vote and for my parents to be able to live in this country. So I thank you all for the opportunity to be a part of this.
Thank you. Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, Aaron or Oren?
Yeah, Aaron.
Okay. So, when I look at I just want to make it clear, I know our country, this is not by any means a perfect nation. We are not, there's some ways there's some aspects where we're not even an ideal nation, but at the end of the day, I'm an American and I love my country and I know it can be better. And it's my responsibility to make a more equal and equitable society here. And when I look at the future, I'm optimistic because more people now than ever are listening. We haven't gotten to the point where we're making the policy changes that really need to be made to root out discrimination and racism in our country, but people are listening. We're having more of a social awakening, and I just want that to continue, because the truth of the matter is that racism here is a political issue, and it shouldn't be. It is a human rights issue. And I think the more we talk about these things, and that we talk about, our differing experiences as people of color, it will become more of a human rights issue, and it won't be, one that we're politicizing. People and more white people will understand that their privilege, is a thing, number one, and that they can use their privilege to create a more, like I said earlier, more equal, equitable, and socially aware society. And I'm optimistic that America will change, that we can change, will change, and that we must change. So.
Thank you much, Aaron, and we continue to wish you all the best as in all your future endeavors. Oren?
Yes, thank you. I think we got to put God back into the equation. Bad things happen when concerned people fail to make boss moves. We need to make some boss moves. We need to speak up, and when people are all wrong, call them out. I mean, like for an example, I don't care if Joe Biden called me the N-word 300 times. I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I don't care what they say. So I'm going with Joe Biden, and we have to step up. We have to make boss moves. I made a boss move in my own life. I started a program called Be Someone. I'm teaching children 6 weeks for free online as we speak now. And so I'm on a mission to make boss moves. Now, when I say boss move, I'm not just talking about it. I'm doing something about it. But we got to put God first, okay? God is still in charge, and God will prevail no matter what. So I disagree with my good friend Richard Ross. So we got to go ahead of God. I don't think so. I'm going to trust God, and no matter what Pharaoh, I'm not going to kill Moses. I'm going to let God deal with this. So God, being a God of just, Richard, will not let evil win over good. And I have 7 children. I have 4 boys and 3 girls. And I tell my children this: on my watch, you ain't fighting the police. On my watch, you're going to respect authority. You're going to get your head up. You're going to get your pants up. You're going to get your grades up. And you're going to never give up. And you're going to make some boss moves. Now, boss moves means you got to call people out when they're wrong. You got to do something about it. I trained over 77,000 kids. Why? Because 7 people were shot in a robbery for $2,000. And I said to myself, bad things happen when concerned people fail to make boss moves. When 19 people were killed in Chicago, I hopped on a plane and did some training in Chicago. I did some training in Baltimore. I did some training in Washington, D.C. I've been in 40 cities doing stuff about it, making boss moves, not talking about it. What are you doing about it? I trained over 77,000 kids. I converted my personal home into a training center, doing something about it. Not talking about it, but doing something about it. What are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? I've trained over 77,000 kids, and I'm doing a free training now, 6 weeks, doing something about it, taking action.
Very well indeed. Your passion is readily visible, really visible, Oren. And
people
yes,
talking
of course.
People talking a lot of game, but what are you doing? What are you doing? I had a lady call me the other day at 1:30 in the morning. She said her son was in a game. Nobody would help her. She said she called every agency. She said, Oren, will you please sign an affidavit and help my son and get him out of a game? She said, none of the agency I called would help me. I said, I got you. I'm going to help you. I'm going to sign the court affidavit. Reporter said, why would you take a phone call from a complete stranger at 1:30 in the morning? I said, a full-time soldier sleeps with his boots on. It's not about me. It's about we.
And all
Yes.
people talk, a lot of people talking crap, but what are you doing? What are you doing?
Definitely, Oren. I think today's conversations has definitely moved us to understand, and I think understanding, respecting, and acknowledging some of the wrongs that are happening from the majority or the minority population on ways to improve, to address racism is definitely. I definitely see a good I have optimism, or I am optimistic about what's happening in the future. My appeal to the South Asian community or the other minority allies is to stand with who are being impacted now. And if you are attending the rally or the protest, of course, please have the mask on, and definitely health matters as well. So we learned what Black Lives Matter is and what it is not today from all the experts here. We heard from Parag on some of the action steps that's needed. We heard from Rob on his leadership qualities, on how he is going to take mentorship in the future on his organizations being inclusive, not just in statements, but also enforcing the policies to make it happen. And Danella, yes, women leadership is much needed. We need to speak up. And Richard, your role is as important for many of those organizations that are looking for your organization to help out. And Kelissa, I can't say, and I mean, enough and force it enough on how important what you do is. And I wish many would sign up with you to learn more how to unlearn something that they've been learning for the whole life. And Ariel, thank you for your wisdom. I miss George, and I hope he's watching from up there and smiling. And Richard, I know you got distracted a little bit, but I was saying how important what you do in your organization is as well. So I wish all of you the best of luck. I wish more minority would ally up, or would partner up with the Black Lives Matter, because right now that's what matters, the Black lives. So thank you again. We wish you all the best, and thank you for your time. And our next month Chai and Chat, please stay tuned on our website for our next month topic and panel discussion. And thank you again to Bytecraft Productions for your support, and Vendorship for the sponsorship. Thank you, and have a good evening. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nasira.
Thank you.